Welcome to the fourth webinar in a series on indoor air quality for Elemental, looking at a range of issues and opportunities that can and do impact and benefit air quality, heating, cooling, health and well-being in the built environment. My name is Jim McClelland. I'm founder and editor of Sustaineme, home to both the magazine and the top 500 rankings. Today's talk specifically asks the question, how does indoor air quality affect well-being? We'll explore the positive well-being wins we get with good IAQ and ventilation, such as productivity in offices, attention spans improved in education, recovery times in health environments, better sleep at home and domestic. From the regs via design to the products and the materials, it's all live with Q&A to finish. So pop your questions in the Q&A box you should find at the bottom of your screen. You pose them, I'll ask them, and these gentlemen will answer them, as I mentioned, on social media. So the whole webinar series is being hosted and produced by Elemental, www.elementalexpo.com, the online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air, and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. You'll find the full diary of events on the website with a range of upcoming webinars, including a series on IoT and smart buildings in January, which might interest some of you. You can also now view the first webinars in the IAQ series on demand. They're discussing going back to work in buildings post-COVID, the indoor climate emergency, plus air tightness and ventilation. Some great speakers in every session, including, of course, the 5 joining me on screen here today, namely Richard Daniels, environmental engineer within the Department for Education Technical Standards Division, Justin Bere, principal at Justin Bere Architects, Will Kirkman, Managing Director of Eco Merchant, Oliver Heath, Biophilic designer, TV presenter and director Oliver Heath Design, and John Felgate, Head of Technical at Stiebel Eltron UK. And this session is sponsored by the lovely people at Stiebel Eltron, part of the International Manufacturing Group, specialising in building services, hot water, green electric heating, heat pump, ventilation and renewables. So by way of a very brief intro, because we want to save most of the time for the 5 other people and your Q&A, just a little bit of context in our first session on getting back to work post-pandemic, without, of course, understating the terrible disruption and loss. We looked at some of the positive unintended consequences of COVID-19, such as our renewed interest in indoor air quality and ventilation, particularly from a healthy environments perspective. Our second webinar, the focus was on global warming, counting the carbon cost of demand for heating and cooling in a debate about the indoor climate emergency. Our third, most recently, zoomed in on more technical matters and looked closer at air tightness and ventilation. So today, what we're looking to do is bring it all together under the banner of indoor air quality and well-being. So from passive housing, residential, via innovation, comfort in the education sector, to the eco supply chain and role of merchants to biophilic design and IEQ. Right, let's zoom in on the issues and bring in the panel. So, as we start to explore how good indoor air quality affects well-being, I'd like to begin by asking each of our panelists, obviously to introduce themselves, but to give us their take on the state of play and priorities at present. So briefly, it's a who are you, where do you fit into the puzzle, what would you highlight currently as key issues for IAQ or IEQ ventilation and well-being? So first, from a perspective of Plus Energy Passive House, Justin.
Hello, I'm Justin Bere, principal of Bere Architects. We've been doing passive house buildings in the UK since about, well, the first one was completed about 2010, 9-10. List of points really that I've learned over those years really. Outdoor and indoor pollutants both affect the air quality in homes. Household products and chemicals are examples of indoor pollutants, and they can be quite carcinogenic, in fact. Indoor relative humidity plays an important role in indoor air quality too. Relative humidity of about 40 to 60% has been proved to be optimal. Above or below this, viruses or bacteria multiply more rapidly, and also fungi and mites thrive above this. And this is thanks to Elias Sterling's research in Canada, 1986, which you can find online. Poor air quality is known to contribute to asthma, heart disease, and COPD. And so what do we conclude from this, apart from the need for much tougher environmental regulation? And tougher environmental regulation would deal with many of the above health risks, but it doesn't deal with CO2, which we all breathe out. And as we've become very aware in this pandemic, even virus aerosol particles. Quite simply, as our grandparents knew, we need to counter this with lots of fresh air. And in the old days, that meant throwing windows open, and then in winter, burning stuff to warm the house up again. Nowadays, we can save energy and keep the windows closed in winter with 100% fresh air, heat recovery, ventilation running 24/7. So on a cold winter evening this week, as an example, it was 2.4 degrees centigrade outside. My heat recovery ventilation unit here lifted effortlessly the temperature to 19.8 degrees centigrade on the incoming air with no heat at all in the air supply. That was just passive heat recovery across a heat exchanger. And the power use is negligible, 16 or 17 watts on supply and the same on exhaust, about 30 watts in total, 32 watts. And then just finally to say, if we build and retrofit houses with insulation and draft-free construction and put a good standard filter on the incoming air to filter out everything from pollens to particulates, the nasty black particulates in urban areas at least, we'll end up with superb indoor air quality. And that's been proven by research, government-funded research on several of our projects over the years. So it's really a no-brainer. 100% fresh air, heat recovery is a gold standard. And it's what all passive house buildings have, giving superb hygiene, ventilation, and superb comfort.
Excellent, there you go. Good pitch at the end, a bit of a call for tougher environmental regs, potentially a live case study description, if you like. Very good start. So Will, in terms of products and materials, the supply chain, where do you fit into the picture?
Well, good morning, everyone. Sorry, it's afternoon. I suppose in some respects, we're an established merchant of 22 years, and what we do is sell building materials. To a large extent, like many merchants, I suppose what we really do is we sell what people ask for. Buying stock speculatively and hoping to persuade people to buy it is not necessarily a good business plan. But nonetheless, we've been going for long enough to know that the products that we sell really fit in to the kind of building that's just been described. The majority of our customers will be building to higher performance levels, will have indoor air quality and occupant health on the agenda. And so we tailor to that market. But there are consequences that take us more broadly, broaden the market for us. So, for example, some of the insulation products that we sell that are hygroscopic and will help in the management of water vapor within the building, are particularly useful on building refurbishments for older buildings. There are benefits to some of the mass delivered by certain insulation products as well. So we can lend our products to more modern methods of construction and to newer buildings. But I suppose in terms of what we try to do really is to support the specifications and the ambitions of architects and designers and clients when it comes to buildings, but also to push the agenda out there. And that's what really we've been focused on for 22 years. And we are still niche by comparison to the larger insulation market is absolutely vast. I would imagine that on the insulation side, the natural insulation probably represents no more than 1 or even 2% of the market. But we've been experiencing really significant growth, and especially this year, which is, it's a very odd problem to have because there are so many people who are struggling. But there are also many people who are trying to put buildings right. And I think there's been a renewed focus on human health since the pandemic. And I think with more people working from home as well, I think other merchants have experienced people living in houses at times when they normally wouldn't be there. So there's a raft of opportunities that present themselves. But in the end, what we're convinced of is that our materials have a place. We only sell building materials, so the building shell is really where we're focused, and it's a significant contributor to boosting the indoor air quality and environment, the healthy environment within a building.
Excellent, thank you, Will. And yeah, it's a good couple of decades, and you don't look a day older.
Thank you.
And
you're kind.
Richard, so coming to you, working within public sector parameters, what are the kinds of issues that interest you and you would be thinking about?
Yeah, so I work in the design team in the Department for Education, and we've been looking at holistic environmental standards for probably 20 years. And we try and think of the indoor environmental quality, incorporating the ventilation, the acoustics, the lighting. And so there's a balance we're looking at schools, not houses, so and early years settings sometimes. A balance between those factors. So, you know, when you open the window, you could get noise, you could get pollution. So there's a balance between those three things. And also, classroom is quite a densely occupied space. It's one of the most densely occupied spaces that you find, more so than offices, more so than houses. Each occupant's got about, 1.5 square meters of space. So you've got 30 occupants or 32 occupants, 2 teachers and 30 children in 55 square meters. And that is a challenge. And we've been moving towards what's called hybrid ventilation systems, which are taking the air from outside, mixing it with the room air to raise the temperature, or using MVHR systems or centralized systems. We've been looking extensively at daylight. We've got new climate-based daylight modeling. We led the sectors on that, moving away from daylight factors, which I don't know if everybody knows, but daylight factors don't take any account of sunlight. They regard the sky as an opaque hemisphere, and sunlight is very conducive to health. I mean, there's a couple of books by Richard Hobday, The Light Revolution and The Healing Sun, which are quite relevant now in the COVID time. UV is known as disinfectant. Fresh air also is a disinfectant, and it's not quite known everything about that, why it's a disinfectant. It's found that when you put fresh air through mechanical ventilation plant, it loses some of that effect, perhaps. So there is things we don't understand about ventilation, and a value in opening windows and having direct fresh air. And then there's also opportunities for heat recovery. Filtration is quite a big thing at the moment with COVID, because a normal panel filter won't filter it out, whereas it will filter out allergens and pollen and things like that. So filtration is something where standards aren't very well established, I'd say. And we're still using something called MERV, which is an American criteria, or things called F7, G4 sort of criteria, when there is new standards on that, European standards, which we should be using for efficiency of particulate filtration. So there's a lot to consider anyway. I'll leave it at that. And
excellent, thank you. Yeah, and that does give us a flavour of the complexity and the interconnectedness of the issues, but also it would focus the mind when you have 32 people potentially in a room, very small distances apart, especially of course this year. And Oliver, so I wonder if I could ask you sort of IAQ well-being in the broader context of biophilic design. Where are you coming at it from?
Yeah, well, just to explain to people, biophilic design investigates the human innate attraction and desire to be in and around nature and natural processes. And essentially, it's an evolutionary design ethos that looks at how we've evolved in close connection to healthy, thriving spaces surrounded by nature, and how important that was to our well-being. And then looking at how we can sort of translate those ideas back into the modern day built environment. You know, we forget that having evolved in nature, it was a very rich multi-sensory experience. And our sense of smell was a key indicator of both threats and opportunities as a means to enhance survival. We kind of fast forward into the modern technological urban age, and we find ourselves living in incredibly dense, complex cities where indoor air quality can be up to 100 times worse, according to the well standard, than it is outside. And yet we know that spending time in nature is good for us. We know that it's good for our physical and mental health, reducing heart rates and blood pressure levels. Studies have shown that actually exercising in nature, breathing in what we call photoncides, which are naturally occurring gases, off-gassing off natural materials. Exercising outside in nature is far better and can actually reduce the risk or the impact of diabetes than compared to exercising in an urban gym. But we do seem to have forgotten that, you know, we live in these kind of now sort of largely sealed boxes, but the air quality is still terrible. And just as an indicator, a very good visual indicator of that, in my own home in Brighton, I have a whole home heat recovery system, which takes warm, stale air from inside the home, from bathrooms and kitchens, anywhere with water, mixes it with fresh air and recirculates the warmth from that. Now, these are the filters from my home. Now, I live in Brighton. It's in a non-industrial town. The prevailing wind is from the southwest. This is, you know, after 9 months, and they're really, really quite shockingly dirty. So, you know, even homes in non-industrial areas are being affected by it. So how do we translate that idea of a desire to be in and around nature with this idea of indoor air quality? Well, firstly, filtration is going to play a role, mechanical ventilation, but also having, you know, opportunities to increase biodiverse, rich nature experiences, being able to open windows, and maybe also being able to incorporate plants.
Excellent.
Many of which are able to remove toxins.
Absolutely, thanks. And I think obviously this year has been exceptional for people, perhaps their hand forced, rediscovering nature and the outdoors because they couldn't do what they normally do in terms of exercise and leisure and things. So I will have a question for you later actually about where that might take us in terms of the built environment and expectations. And then, John, manufacturer on behalf of our sponsor, Stiebel Eltron, where are you seeing things in terms of well-being and indoor air quality?
Yeah, thanks. So to explain, I work for a German manufacturing firm who specialize in renewable energy, heating, hot water and ventilation systems. And I've been doing that for about 15 or actually closer to 20 years now, working with architects, consultants, developers and installers. And I would like to discuss during this internal air quality session, what are the main drivers for the different sectors of the market. So imagine private self-build, education, housing association, local authority, or developers. What are the barriers to each of these and how we as a group or as an industry can knock down those barriers to improve air quality within our buildings? And I've got some ideas to share a bit later on. So yeah, I look forward to the debate.
Excellent, thank you very much, John. And we already have questions coming in, and keep them coming. Some anonymous, some named, so it's good to see them appearing as we progress. So the middle question I've got for you, really, I'd like to zoom in quickly on a few particulars and explore some of the issues arise in different market sectors, building projects, challenges, whether it's culture compliance, briefs, budgets, refurb, retrofit. So briefly, if I throw out a few slightly more challenging questions, perhaps start with yourself, Oliver, particularly with respect to indoor air quality. Is there the science, the evidence to actually support design for well-being at present? Can you back it up?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's been done increasingly. Biophilic design, as is much of human-centered design, is an evidence-based approach. So it's based on years of peer-reviewed studies that demonstrate the benefits of enhancing the human connection to nature and looking at the evidence. And many of these studies are also fundamental to the well-building standard, which is the standard kind of brought about by the IWBI, International World Building Institute. And that whole well-being standard is based on studies. Now, when we start to kind of get into biophilic design, for many people that does mean the introduction of plants and greenery, much like I have in my office. And there are sort of certain studies being cited regularly, such as the NASA Clean Air study. However, I would say there is some skepticism about the use of some of these studies. The NASA Clean Air study in particular basically took in particular plants, put them in boxes, measured the air quality, they injected certain toxins and looked at how the plants removed them. The problem is that when you translate those kind of very tiny little studies into a large space or room, actually the ability for plants to clean air is rather limited. So until we get into the larger use and introduction of plants, particularly the use of green walls and enclosed meeting spaces, it's difficult to prove the actual benefit of plants and greenery. However, having said that, I worked last year with a company called Biotecture, who are experts in green walls, in creating what we called an active air unit, which basically filtered air from spaces through leaves and through the roots of the plants, then that's really important, back into a unit where the air was then freshened and cleaned by the roots of those plants and then pumped out again. So what they found was that actually those plants, when combined with a mechanical system, did actually have the ability to improve air quality in a much more measurable way. The other thing that's worth mentioning is the perception of clean air as a result of having plants and greenery around, because when people see plants and greenery, there's the immediate assumption that actually if plants and greenery can survive in a space, then so can I. So there is a value even in just the introduction of that greenery. Plus we do know that many trees and many plants can remove particulates like PM10s and PM2.5s. They can filter. So I think increasingly we are seeing how that's happening. We did one notable study with the Building Research Establishment in Watford recently on the Biophilic office project. And what was interesting was that because we were looking at an existing space, what they found was that actually the air quality was relatively okay because everything had, you know, in a sense, off-gassed over the last 30 years. What was very different though, from the quantitative research that they measured the air quality, was the qualitative research that there was a perception that the space was stale, that it was old, that there was poor air quality because of the colour of the paint, because of the lack of maintenance, because of the lack of plants and greenery. It didn't feel fresh. And so there was sort of, it's important, I think, if we're going to start to look at this research, that it's not just about quantifying it, but it is about the perception of fresh air.
Excellent. And yeah, there are those psychological or emotional elements or associations or considerations which yeah, are obviously need to be taken into account. And Richard, you've described some of the complexity. So when you have a concept like well-being, how do you see you apply standards for something as complex as well-being across an estate as varied as education? How do you actually apply standards across education?
I think that the role of standards is to set a minimum baseline. Building regs, you probably know, is probably the lowest bar you could have, and that was health and safety derived originally. In schools, we've gone somewhat above that baseline, and then there's a big role for guidance. So standards is one thing, and guidance is very important for people who want to go further or to become more bespoke and to think about issues in more depth, probably. And the wellbeing standard is interesting. BREEAM standard also is interesting. There's numerous of these standards actually that have happened in the past, and I suppose wellbeing's a front runner at the moment. And they all have a role to play in educating the architects and the designers. But I think it is the architect's role really, along with the engineer, but probably primarily the architect, to set the holistic design parameters up. And regulation is just part of the whole tapestry, you know, like setting zero carbon targets or kilowatt hours per square meter, all sorts of things like this. And the other thing to be quite aware of is unintended consequences of standardization or regulations. You know, you can take the 60s buildings, off-site buildings, led to a lot of unintended consequences. The wide application of daylight factors, so you had overglazed southerly facades which were very, very hot. But there's no substitute for the architects and the engineers becoming knowledgeable, I think, and then trying to apply these principles.
Excellent, thank you. And that's that'll be a nice challenge which we'll be able to pick up with Justin in just a moment there. So John, as a manufacturer, obviously the whole spectrum of individual product ranges, How do you help specifiers adopt a more joined up, coherent approach? Is that your job? And if so, how do you help them join up the dots?
So a joined up and coherent approach, that's good. So I speak with new build developers who are all about build cost. Or to put it another way, they ask me what's the most cost effective way through the regs, the regulations. Now that highlights to me the fact that that sector of the market is driven by regulatory change, and we as a group have to lobby to get, well, specifically Part F of the building regs to improve. Echo Richard's comment there. It's the lowest bar, and we've got to raise it. So I think more of a stick than a carrot is required for that kind of new build sector, I think. In contrast, the retrofit market is not so much about build cost, but more about improving air quality within existing buildings. So it could be homeowners or local authority, housing associations, which have a duty of care to the tenants. They need to be educated in the benefits of good ventilation and how that can reduce running costs, which is key, I think, to being successful and selling in that space, and reduce maintenance costs for the building, and of course have health benefits. So to come back to the question, I think we need to improve new build through regulatory change, whilst also, and all of us, we all need to sell the benefits to the retrofit market. So yeah, a multi-pronged approach, I think.
Excellent, thank you. And that leads me, segues nicely in a way to Will, because obviously you have a pivotal role in the supply chain, is how I'm describing it. So my challenge to you is kind of how can merchants effectively act as an honest broker for well-being? How in your pivotal role can you be trusted, an honest broker for some of these benefits and opportunities?
That's an interesting question. An honest broker. Well, part of it, I suppose, begins with the fact that an awful lot of our customers that we sell to are actually building way beyond building regulations, so are pre-qualified to quite a high degree anyway. So we've got many architects who we deal with who will have done their research, building designers who understand the products. So I suppose the honesty part comes with choosing products that are well certified, independently certified and tested, and have a pedigree sitting behind them. There's nothing better than an endless stream of people going, no, we're delighted with what we've done and it works really well, especially if you've got post-occupancy data that you can show to people. I think that part of this as well has been to do with the approach that people have and how it's coloured. I think the recent and really quite shocking revelations from the Grenfell inquiry lead people to question how they trust people to make a judgment about what is right and what is wrong, and certainly to question whether or not people's test data or what they say about their test data, in fact, is to be believed. I suppose in some respects also there's a tendency towards the benign. If you're building out of wool or cellulose or wood, there is less likelihood that they will be they will contain anything pernicious or anything potentially damaging to either you or the environment, and they may well stand a chance of being better placed in terms of carbon. In fact, timber would certainly fall into that category, and also in terms of recycling and disposal. So in many ways, it's really not a question of honesty, it's a question of openness. You know, we supply, for example, paints and wood treatments from a company, one of the few companies in the world who actually fully declare everything in their products. It's amazing how much that you can buy where it is undisclosed. And this also matters when it comes to assessments of things like VOCs or the potential for off-gassing or formaldehyde, for example, in building products. So I think really to answer the question is we try as best we can. We use third-party accreditations. We occasionally depart and use something like Green Spec Pass to assess products where the manufacturer was happy to take part. But generally speaking, I think we have a tendency towards the natural, and we tend to work most commonly with people who are going way beyond regs. So they bring with them an awful lot of knowledge and research. And part of our job then in terms of the approach is to put people together and create a collaborative team, as it were, although that sounds like an oxymoron, to deliver, so that we work with people and that we rely on others' expertise as well. And then we present to our customer base the results of what we've done and the success stories that are presented to us by our customers.
Excellent, thank you. And I think openness is a good word, and I hear some, it chimes with, there are other areas where transparency around consumer products, especially food and maybe health and beauty, people are very much scrutinizing the packaging. Now, I know we might be talking about product literature and more extensive, but the expectation all round is rising in terms of being able to access the information and being able to see what's in things. So I think there's an overall groundswell about expectation around transparency and availability of information. So Justin, so if we're wanting to deliver more than just good intentions around well-being, how do you actually close the gap between design and use? How do you get what you ask for?
Well, I've got a few sort of technical tips, I suppose. I mean, firstly, just responding to you said about the challenge from Richard. I totally agree with Richard. It is the architect's responsibility to, to try and lead this, and to try and persuade clients. Obviously, some architects have a lot of difficulty, or they don't have a client, despite their best intentions, who doesn't have any interest at all. We're fortunate in having clients who come to us who ask us to do the stuff that we want to do. Just on the closing the gap, type of ductwork I would put as first thing. I had a personal experience before heat recovery ventilation was really much known about in the UK. I got someone who had the first heat recovery ventilation unit in the UK. It was Ubink, and I got their person to come along and help me. It was impossible trying to get design out of them. This was about 2003 or something, 2004. Impossible to try and get design out of them. And we ended up with this ghastly flexible, spiral wound, flexible double skin aluminium foil covered stuff, which was impossible to keep properly airtight. It gets punctured all the time with the metal ties that you have to put around the duct to connect it to other junctions and so on. So that was a complete disaster, and I realized it was just terrible. And I pulled the whole lot out. Well, actually, there was also, they put in some awful plastic stuff as well, which was, there is very good plastic stuff now, but there's some awful stuff with, just with screws connecting together and a bit of duct tape around. And after a few years, that cruddy old duct tape just peels away and the whole lot is leaky. So you can now get, the one we've used most of is the Lindab with the rubber seal, double seal connectors. Push fit, you can try it, you can see if it's all fitting correctly. You can then dismantle it and cut a bit off, or put a slightly longer piece of pipe in between two junctions. So it's really, really good from that point of view. You're not sort of stuck once you've driven a screw into the thing, and you're not reliant on tape. And then there's also really good flexi plastic ductwork, which is useful because you can just bend it through. Well, firstly, you can have two smaller pipes rather than slightly larger pipes of metal going into a little manifold, and you can push it and turn it around through quite difficult routes. So type of equipment is, I in the spring replaced a unit. It was a very early unit, the Ubink unit that I put in years ago, and I actually tried to wash out the heat exchanger, because the heat exchanger, you must have good filtration, not only for the occupants but to protect the integrity of the heat exchanger, to make it exchange heat properly. And I tried to change or wash out the heat exchanger, which is dead easy with the new ones, but the one that I had, I made I didn't realize it was basically I had to dismantle the whole thing and it never went back together again properly. Anyway, good modern ones like Stiebel, Eltron or Zender or Paul or whatever, these will all be designed for really easy taking out of the heat exchanger, maybe every couple of years or something, sticking in the shower, washing it through. Designing of the system, really important, really important to have a really good designer so you don't have airflows that are too noisy, that and then testing and that you've got silencers on the system and so on. Right. Testing is really important. You need the right equipment. People, I mean, one contractor tried to buy a 30 quid little device to test the airflow on the ducts themselves, and I said no, it's absolutely, because I won't go into too much in detail, but you have to pay about 1,000, no, it's about 3,000 I think, for or hire a really good one, which because for passive house airflow, we're not talking about like air conditioning or like an office thing which is blasting air through. It's actually very gentle. You put your hand against it, it's just very gentle. And the cheaper devices have resistance in their own motors, so you get completely inaccurate results from them. You must have a very good device.
Thank you. Well, yeah, evidence there of it's a learning curve for all of us, and especially over time. And I see now we're getting quite a flood of questions queuing up. So my last question to you, I'm going to put you under a bit of time constraint, guys, to just give me a quick 1 minute rapid fire answer so that we can devote appropriate time to our audience who are firing in their questions. So these are quick, it's kind of 1 minute fast responses, starting with you, John, if you're on your marks there. So the question is, how can product innovation drive performance around well-being?
So in terms of product design, I think we have to make it much more accessible and easier. I think we need to get away from ducted systems. Controversially, shoot me down, but I think we need to get away from ducted systems. They're too difficult to install in existing houses, and they take up valuable space in the new build market. So I'd like to ask everyone to imagine a number of small through-the-wall fans that are installed on the external walls of a house, and they're linked together using wires rather than ducts, and they work together to change the air in that house. So when one is extracting stale air, the other is bringing in fresh filtered air from outside. Combine that with aluminium heat exchangers that are built into the fans to recover heat, and I think you end up with a good solution. So I'd be interested in anyone's views on how the different sectors of the market that we discussed earlier would respond to a product like that. 1 minute.
Excellent. Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. Justin, your minute's going to start, and you've got a great big broad question, so just 60 seconds of answer. So how can you deliver on both aesthetics and technical excellence?
And I thought I was going to answer that other question. Or was that for afterwards?
Yeah, I think those are for after. I think there's some specifics there, but I've just got a quick one. How do you get aesthetics and technical excellence?
Well, I can be very brief in answering. I mean, there is absolutely no constraint between technical excellence and aesthetics at all. I
just choose a good designer is what I'm saying. Yeah. For instance. Yeah, I'll say it for you.
I mean, well,
Will. So embracing health and well-being. 1 minute pitch. How can merchants literally sell sustainability to the mainstream markets? How do you sell it?
We make noise. We get out there, and we constantly go on about it, that it is a viable option. We put it into context. PIR itself was really only started manufacturing in the late 70s, early 80s. So when people describe it as traditional, we think to ourselves, oh, really? So there's really traditional versus new. It's just appropriate solutions for and tested solutions for building. Go to where the critical demand is. So look at it. Certainly, retrofit is absolutely key to the market for promoting sustainable and natural building materials. And we work collaboratively wherever possible. Although we would like to be just answering the phone saying thanks very much, how much do you want, when do you want it, where do you want it. We do like to talk to our customers where we can and where we've got time, but it really helps everybody to grow the market and to get these products established if we are working more collaboratively than perhaps traditional builders merchants are used to doing so.
Excellent, thank you. And Oliver, we sort of touched on this earlier, but a 1 minute response, you know, it's kind of never wasted a good crisis, but given the year we've had, how can you leverage a current spike in interest in healthy indoor environments to incorporate nature better into the built environment? So 60 seconds, how do you get people to pick up this new interest and get nature back into the built environment?
Well, first of all, you know, we need to be undertaking more pre and post occupancy evaluations to understand both the quantitative and qualitative aspects, to recognize that people enjoy being in nature. We need to actively reduce toxins in spaces with innovation through materials, low VOCs. I've been working with Interface, the flooring manufacturer, recently, who have devised a sort of little tactile, little sort of sticker that holds together 4 tiles and holds all the flooring down. So, you know, that way we can reduce the use of glues to hold floor tiles down. We can enhance air purification methods, whether that's a room by room approach, as John's mentioned, or a whole building recovery system. And we can actively improve perceived air quality through plants, green walls, but also scenting, but also make sure that people have varied, rich experiences, that we don't just create a one homogenized space, but that we recognize that when we're in nature, we have a variety of experiences that have different humidity levels, different wind speed levels, and that this is actually quite important to overall experience. So we need to create those rich, diverse experiences in buildings, much like we enjoy in nature.
Excellent, thank you. And I think the whole idea of user experience, UX, I think is becoming much more talked about in terms of buildings and the built environment, you know, as growing awareness. And then finally, Richard, we've been doing very well with our 1 minute responses. It's on wellbeing and IAQ. So this is your 60-second question, Richard. How can building performance in education become a beacon for best practice such that positive lessons get learned industry-wide? So how can education be a beacon for best practice?
Maybe through the building performance evaluations we've carried out. And that's not just an education thing, but we just done it in education at the moment. And building occupancy surveys, getting data on the children, their health data, their education data, trying to work out what the effects of substances are, not talking just about VOCs, but drilling down into the labeling of the actual products, like they have in Europe, a lot of labeling schemes, and where you look at the actual chemicals that are concerned, not just talk about VOCs, because some of these VOCs are a lot worse than others. And we need to start getting away from the catch-all of VOCs.
Excellent, thank you. And we're now then bang on time. We're moving to open matters up to our virtual floor live Q&A. We've got a bundle of questions already in the panel. I think you'll see them to the side. And I've said keep asking them. You pose them, I'll ask them. Richard, Justin, Will, Oliver, and John will answer them. So there's 1 or 2 specifics. I'll try and pick up the ones that are for individuals first quickly, and then we'll have some open ones where I'll just throw the general question out. If you give me a bit of a zoom wave and indicate you'd like to respond. So quick one first for you, Richard. Jonathan Hunter Hill has asked, when should we expect to see a revision of BB 101 that closes a chasm of indoor air quality, thermal comfort, and energy consumption to methods of ventilation in schools? Hybrid systems just aren't up to scratch when you need to add heated batteries to make them work. So when should we, classic question to the likes of yourself, when should we expect to see the revision?
Yeah, so we are continuously revising it, and something called our output spec is available on the web and has already revised stuff that's in the ventilation standards in BB 101. And on hybrid, there are developments now where the fans can, I mean, the heater batteries are being used, and even cooling batteries are being used. So firms like Monodraft, firms like VES Andover, Gilbert's, there's lots of people working on the further development of these systems. So it's not just one type of system. They are evolving as demands change.
Excellent, thank you. And John, I've got a couple for you here. I'm seeing one from Emily Vernon. actually that's for Will, but one from Vince House challenges you, John, that small fans in each room make too much noise. They cannot move the air as required. So there's a challenge for you there, John.
Yeah, I see that. That's one of the downsides. And I guess the only way to combat that is with a fan that has a big enough surface area so that the speed of airflow is low enough not to be a problem. Also, it's fairly common in systems like that to have two fans in one room to reduce the noise, but also to increase the airflow for that particular room, whatever it might be. You know, it might be a lounge or a kitchen or an office even. So yeah, that's definitely one of the design considerations we have to take into account. And it's the same a little bit with centralized systems. You know, we have to take care about the grills, and we don't want whistling or anything like that. So quite often when I'm designing a centralized system for ventilation, I end up with multiple you know, inlets and outlets in one room. So yeah, definitely something to be aware of. So yeah, thanks for raising it.
Can I respond to? Yep. Can I respond to this on this topic?
Sure.
Firstly, I think when we talked about, when John mentioned duct-free ventilation, I thought he was going to refer to cascade ventilation, which is a perfectly good system where you're taking air through from one room to another through acoustic grills and so on, but you are extracting from, say, a bathroom or a kitchen as well, and that works well with a centralized unit. The through-the-wall units, I have looked into it for I mean, I've been aware of them for years. I've looked, I mean, the little through-the-wall units I've looked at for a grade 1 listed house, but the problem is, one, they get very expensive because they're not cheap. A good one could set you back £800 or so for one room. And you do a few rooms and you've got to the same cost as a centralized system, or even more. The supplier I spoke to actually said, oh, we're telling people, because I said, what about the filters? You don't mention filters. You don't mention about changing them, cleaning them. And he said, oh, well, we're recommending to all our clients that they take the filters out, and to all our installers. So the heat recovery performance of those units is going to be wrecked very quickly. So there's a lot of misinformation around, and that makes me very, very wary about a through-the-wall system. But there will be occasions, just occasions, or if you're really not spending much at all on a building, you just want to, say, do something better for a bathroom than an extractor fan where you stick your hand outside and you feel the hot air blowing straight out, then they're very good for that sort of situation, but not as a rule.
Okay, and I'm seeing also Emily Vernon's asked one actually jointly for John and Will, in that she's picked up on what both of you were saying, or each of you. She's saying, Will talked about supply and demand, John talked about educating for retrofit. So a quick answer from you each. Could you envisage any scenario where we could put a price on the importance of air quality so that consumers and clients can make informed decisions? So in other words, business case, can you envisage any scenario where we're beginning to put a price on air quality such that you can talk to clients about making sales?
Well,
that is quite a tricky one.
It is.
Yeah.
The savings on the National Health Service, if someone is is healthy. I mean, there are films on our website of someone in one of our retrofit for the future houses with COPD, from a huge cost on the National Health. Porsche and his wife both were very, very unwell. So there are savings, but how can you put a price really on people's health? I mean, I think the way to look at the economics is to be imaginative, to say, what would people in 200 years or 100 years or 200 years expect us to be doing now that would help us and help them? And that would be doing deep retrofit, doing this work, and then applying with a grant, applying the charges to the properties, and then that over 100 years, the repayments for whoever lives in that property, because people are spending quite a lot of money doing something for future generations who are living in that property. Whoever lives there will pay back a little bit. And I think people in 100 years' time will look back and say, wow, they actually thought about us instead of building those stupid power stations which burnt out in 25 years, and are no good for us. They've actually put the investment in the buildings which has a 100-year heritage or more, 200-year heritage.
And I think we have one here, an open one, if anybody would like to throw their hand up, from Peter Kaminsky. How does the panel feel about active UV photocatalytic oxidation technology being used to recreate naturally occurring fresh air hydroperoxides in an indoor environment?
Got to be Richard, that one.
Any thoughts on that one, Richard?
There's quite a lot of research going on into ultraviolet germicidal irradiation at the moment. In the 1940s, it was discovered that UV can prevent measles. It's also known that it can affect viruses, and so it's been looked at the moment. There's many devices on the market which you might want to avoid, which are untried and unproven devices, but as a technology, sunlight is a good disinfectant, and the particular part of it, which is germicidal, has been looked into. There's dangers from it because it is very bad for your eyesight, so you cannot have it in the plane of view at all. And so then sunlight is different. It also has germicidal properties, but not to the same extent as 254 nanometers is the one that they're focusing on. So there's a lot of research, and it's used in disinfectant in hospitals in unoccupied spaces, for instance. But then you have to have security interlocks so people can't go in there when it's happening.
Right, good. That's very appreciative to have your technical expertise on that one there. And I think there's some broader questions somebody anonymously has asked. Sorry if this is a silly question, but is a ventilation or indoor air quality system something that exists as part of a tender, or is it an afterthought on a completed project? Well, maybe in the current circumstances, there may be a lot of retrofit and there may be not exactly afterthoughts, but I don't know if the panel have any comment on to what degree it is included early enough in the spec and design, and to what degree it's a bolt-on belatedly.
Fundamental to our projects will always be right at the beginning. Yeah.
John, your hand up there.
Yeah, I'd echo Justin there. I think on the new build side of things, it's built into the spec early on these days. That's great. But the challenge, I think, is the retrofit market. That's where the volume is and the problem is. And yeah, then of course it's an afterthought. Usually triggered by somebody moving in or somebody doing an extension or something like that. That generally kicks it off. But is it built into tenders? Only really new build, I'd say.
Right.
Built into all our retrofit tenders.
And Oliver, I know you've already answered one online about filters and replacing them every 3 to 4 months. That was from Vince House, and I think you've given him an answer. There's also a question coming anonymously about this year projects being led by commercial gain. I know we've touched on that first, rather than the well-being of the occupants. How do you flip that and get a more people-centric approach from the off, Oliver?
Well, I think fundamental to that is a good pre and post occupancy evaluation, making sure that we understand the baseline of the situation, investigating the building, seeing if there are particular areas that are more or less productive if we're talking about commercial spaces, and then using that as a fundamental part of the brief. And I think there is another question later on as to whose responsibility is that pre and post occupancy evaluation. And yeah, and that's questionable. I mean, is that something that the architects want to enforce upon the client as a kind of fundamental of their appointment? Or is it something that, I mean, as I believe, it's something that the client should undertake prior to working with an architect to fully understand the situation, the existing situation, and as a means to measure the benefit that the good design, the human-centered approach will deliver, part of which one would hope would be a recognition of the importance that good air quality plays on different spaces in a building.
Excellent, thank you. This is an open one. Anybody could jump in here, potentially including Richard. Best examples of schools that have currently invested in well-being-led strategies. The person, it's anonymous, say they've read about New Muswell Hill School ARC. I imagine there's more. Any quick name checks for?
Just look at any archetype schools, passive house schools across the country. Superb.
Yeah, what's the one in? Is it Cambridgeshire? Isn't it the? What's the beautiful? I can't remember the name of it. Built with local materials. I think it was an archetype project, wasn't it? Do you know that one, Richard?
I'm not sure which.
Sorry, I don't know. No.
Oh, it's called, I think it's called Enterprise School or something like that at
Okay.
University of East Anglia.
That's
All right, excellent.
yeah, the Enterprise Centre. It's an office building primarily.
Yeah.
And we've got the last few minutes now, so I'll rattle through a few more. Vince House, do you think SAP is the correct way to measure the performance of buildings? Could more be done to measure IAQ? Open question. Anybody who fancies it? Is SAP the way to go? John.
My view is SAP is a kind of dangerous thing. People use it as a design tool, and it shouldn't really be a design tool. It's a way of proving compliance with regulations, which, as Richard mentioned, is kind of the minimum bar we should aspire to attain, really. So I don't think SAP does enough. It's also a difficult thing to change. I chair a couple of groups, manufacturers associations, who are always discussing the next change, and it rolls on year. So my view is no, don't use SAP as a design tool. Do better.
Yeah, and I think that the regs are MHCLG, the department that does the building regs, is looking at housing and revising the ventilation standards, and they probably will look at pollutants and things as well. So there, I don't know if it's out to consultation or will be out soon, or watch their consultation website for Part F. They will be doing something.
Thank you. And last few minutes, I see you've already answered this, Will, but you could come back on this. The one about is there an issue in projects being led by commercial gain? And I think you said in the panel, absolutely, we see it all the time, unfortunately, especially with major house builders. I wondered if you care to elaborate on that momentarily.
It was slightly less to do with price, but it was to do about how decisions are made and how things are built. If you're building simply for shareholder profit, then you have different motivators. If you're building for a house for which you will then live until you exit this life. And so the thing about it is that as well with indoor air quality, if you read various reports that are out there, it's well known that a lot of the effects of poor indoor air quality are not actually revealed for many, many years. Where we see it as a supplier is quite often people will ring up and say, I am chemically sensitized, I have an asthmatic child. The other place you'll see it is when you see damp in buildings, and that might be typically manifested as mold. And that doesn't appear instantly. It takes a while to get there, but that's evidence as well that you've got poor indoor air quality. So we sell products that not only mitigate that, but also will help prevent it in the first place. So I think the answer is complicated, but the point is that IAQ should be on your agenda. You're living in the building. It's you and your family. You spend a lot of time indoors, and you should try and get it right. So, and the other thing is in comparatively, so if you change, for example, if you used a calcium silicate board rather than a plasterboard system on a solid wall to help mitigate damp, you may be talking equivalent price, you may be talking a few pounds a square metre more, but spread that over the years and it becomes pence a year. So really, the cheapest time to build well is the first go. You're borrowing the money. I mean, what are interest rates at the moment? So realistically, there's no reason not to consider building healthy. It's never going to be like 10 times the price. Even people building passive. We supply builders who build passive for comparative prices in London to block and brick construction, and they're building passive and passive plus. So, there's plenty of things to myths to bust here. But we'll all carry on going. But I think that's what I wanted to say really is that we are probably talking about pence, but we are more importantly talking about getting this right at the beginning.
There you go.
Rather than waiting for the symptoms to reveal themselves many, many years later.
There's a nice note to finish on. Then IAQ should be on everybody's agenda, and the onus is on you wherever you fit into the spectrum: client, customer, designers, consultants, suppliers, manufacturers, merchants, public sector. The onus is on you collectively to get it right or more right first time. So it's kind of a nice note to finish on. Thank you to Debbie, who popped a note in the chat with a link to the Archetype project, the Enterprise Centre UEA that was mentioned earlier. Very kind. So we've rattled through our questions. There's a few more, one or two have gone unanswered, but we'll try and pick them up afterwards potentially. So in closing then, A big thank you to all our panelists, Richard, Justin, Will, Oliver and John, to the lovely people at Stiebel, Eltron, our sponsors today, to yourselves out there in Zoom land, thank you very much for your questions. A reminder to check out Elemental, www.elementalexpo.com, the online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air and energy within the built environment. Full diary of events on the website, upcoming webinars, and in case you missed it, there's a back catalogue of recent sessions available to watch on demand, and this session will be joining them, so you can refer colleagues who couldn't attend today or other contacts to view this after the event if you would like them to. So that's it for today. I've been Jim McClelland. Thank you very much to all the guys in front of me. Thanks for watching. See you again soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.